Compassionate leadership isn't only about humanity, it's also about performance. So it's about having the courage to have the difficult conversations. It's about being authentic as precious coming down from you.
Hello, welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. My guest today is Kathryn McEwen. She leads the Working with Resilience Consortium in South Australia. She's an organizational psychologist, executive coach, and mediator, and led the development of the Resilience at Work Toolkit. We talked about resilience, no surprise. We talked about habits and routines. We talked about thinking about the collective versus thinking about what works for the individual. We had a really nice conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. Kathryn, I'm so glad we got this call scheduled finally.
My pleasure.
The first question that I'm asking this year for 2026 is, what would the title be of a book about you if your worst enemy wrote it?
It's a very interesting question because I think most people would think or like to think they don't have any enemies. Reflecting on this, I think that for me, when I do fall out occasionally with people, I'm very unforgiving. So it probably would be unforgiving. And last year, I was working with someone who I felt lacked integrity. They were saying one thing, doing something else, and people were being hurt, including me, in the aftermath. And I just disconnect from the person and have nothing to do with them. So very unforgiving when I feel I've been let down and integrity's gone, particularly if they're in a position of influence or leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, out of my life.
Kathryn, it's like I answered the question, hearing you say that.
Great, I pass then.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that answer because, as you say, we don't want to think that we have enemies. And if not absolute enemies, we all have people that we have somehow wronged in some way. So we somehow just have a disconnect with. Okay, so we're here to talk about resilience, and I know that's something that's on top of your mind as it is on mine. Everyone has had a moment, I think, in their life that changes how they think about leading or how they think about the need to take care of other people. What is one of those moments for you that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, well, I think there's probably been a lot, but fortunately, some of the significant ones I think were very early in my career, which is always helpful, isn't it? And I think I can be very critical. I'd like to think it's discerning. I'm quite hard to impress, and so I'm very evaluative. And so I think very early in my career, competence was really important. So if I had someone I was reporting to, someone in leadership, then if I didn't perceive them as competent in my terms, then I would write them off. And very early in the piece, I was an officer in the Army Reserve, and I felt some of my senior officers were just hopeless, and I would try to avoid saluting them and all sorts of ridiculous things. And someone said to me, that you're not respecting, you need to respect the rank, not the person. And that really, really held for me because they're there for a reason. They have strengths, they have their own competencies. And so what I need to do is to recognize that and recognize their status. And so for me, respecting the chain of command or whatever you want to call it in an organization is really, really important. But beyond that, everyone has strengths and everyone has their value and not dismissing that. So I think that's been really important for me. And that was very early. Yeah. I was like 21 or something.
Well, what a great lesson to get early on that
Yeah.
everyone has value, and whether you see it or it aligns with what you've got going on may not be the thing you're supposed to be paying attention to in that moment. So, thank you for sharing that. And when I think about the topic of resilience, I realize that it's a word that I think about a lot, and I don't think other people necessarily think of the word resilience. If they're outside of our world, I think that might not be it might not be the term that comes to mind for people. And so I guess for some people it's kind of finding your footing. It's getting back to normal, I think is what a lot of people refer to it. But some people do that faster than others, and we know it's just because of the way that we all experience our lives. What have you seen that actually helps people build that resilience, find their footing, get back to whatever they want to describe as normal, and recover and move forward?
Yeah, so I think it's about having a number of resources. So I think of resilience not as something that's fixed, not as something that you are or you're not. It's very much a state that we're in at the moment. So, today I could feel quite on top of things and quite resilient. Tomorrow or next week I may not, depending on the context. So for me, it's about how do we work out what is it that resources us? What are the things that are going to allow us to be the best we can be with whatever's going on? And I think the more we invest in those things, and I'll give you some examples in a moment, the more we invest in those things, the less likely we're going to go quite into the dip that we might go. And we all go into dips, but it's actually about making sure that dip isn't too deep, if you like, and that we can come out. So examples, they're obvious, aren't they? But we don't necessarily have them at a conscious level. As you said, this word resilience, unless you think a lot about it, you don't really explore what this is. But I work in the workplace, being an organizational psychologist, my work has been what creates sustained resilience at work. So examples are being really clear why you're there and the value you have and the purpose, and being aligned with what's important to you, your values, So at a very core level, if you want to be resilient at work, unless you've got those, you're just going to be disengaged, cynical, your soul will go. But then, of course, there's the other stuff that we know about around, the people around us, the investment in significant relationships that we know are going to resource rather than deplete us. Our health, our general self-care, the way in which we work with people. So it's very much for me around how do we actually recognize what's going to help us, and how do we develop habits and routines about investing in those resources so we can be the best we can be in the system we work in. So it's very much the premise. And then of course that's individually, but we can also talk about what that looks like collectively as well, because that's different.
Yeah, I'd be interested in your perspective. What does that look like collectively?
Yeah. So if you think about yourself in the workplace, you're not, you're always in a team, aren't you? You're always working with other people. And so if we pick up the purpose piece, okay, so or the values, I can be really clear on what my value add is and what I stand for. If that's not aligned with the people I work with, it's going to create a lot of conflict. And so to be resilient collectively, and this isn't just at work, this is also in communities, of course, is that we have to be aligned on lots of things. We have to be aligned on what self-care looks like, because if you've got your version of what that looks like, it might be yoga or whatever, but we have a very different version, and we don't think it's important for you to go lunchtime for yoga. It's about the culture. It's about what support looks like that we agree on. It's about, as I say, the purpose and the values. There's so many additional factors that give us like this mini micro part of the system, if you like, that holds us and protects us as best it can to be the best we can be. So I think a lot of it is about being, how do I be the best I can be individually? How do I be the best I can be as a team? And of course, leaders have a big impact too. So what is the leader's role in nurturing that culture that enables us, rather than detracting from it or sometimes destroying it? Yeah. So many levels. And I like to think about each part of the system trying to align the resources we need and whatever it is we need to be synchronicity on. Yeah, so it's complicated, isn't it, when you
It
start
is, it is,
yeah.
well, it's complicated because people are complicated. And you mentioned, so for example, if yoga is really important to me and that's something I need to do at lunch break or something, and that isn't something that seems important to you, or you don't understand why it's important to me, there can be this disconnect. And I think that all of us people, but here we're thinking of leaders in an organization, can mean really well. They can absolutely want to help, but still make things harder for people. So what have you seen that gets in the way of that kind of progress or that kind of understanding, even with the good intentions?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a good example would be optimism and self-care from the leaders. As a leader, I need to be the best I can be. So I would be investing in the way I see the world, my mindset, how I'm looking after myself. However, if that is actually disconnected from my team, it can cause problems. Now, so optimism is a really good example. So, Emmanuel, we might have just recruited you as our leader because you've got this amazing vision and all these fantastic ideas. And, we really want you to shake us up, shake this organization up. But you start and you're very positive and you're very optimistic and you're talking all this stuff up, but you haven't taken the time to find out the reality. And we're in a situation where we're exhausted. You're our fourth lead or whatever. So again, what's good for you in terms of the optimism, the positivity might be a bit too much for us. So having to align that, you might be a marathon runner or something, you might be full on into working, 12 hours a day and all that sort of stuff. So again, it's about what do you do to help yourself, but how do you be mindful of what that might look like for your team? So it's really hard for leaders because I think particularly middle management leaders, they're so much under pressure themselves with expectations above, and then trying to manage the team and also fill the gaps when people are off, which very few people seem to have all their team at work at any one stage these days. So you're constantly filling the gap, managing up, managing yourself.
Right. And you mentioned something that I think about a lot too, which is being mindful of how something looks to the team. I think it can be really easy for all of us, frankly, at whatever level, but I think it hits a little harder if it's a manager or a leader to say something that is really just unfortunately tone deaf for other people's reality. Is it even possible to avoid that?
Probably not. I mean, it involves a lot of self-awareness. A lot of this stuff doesn't it really? But you may have no idea. I mean, if we think about the flip side of optimism, so if I'm the leader this time, and I'm not in a good place at the moment. I might have things going on at home. I might have my manager who's expecting me to do things that I think are unrealistic, and I might be in a very low, pessimistic, not myself. And so, because I am the leader, as you said, because you're a leader, you have a big impact. So if I'm turning up like that, my team are thinking, well, what hope is there for us? But I might be unaware of the fact that I'm actually not myself. They are,
Right.
but not. Yeah. So again, the tone, as you say, it sets the tone for the whole team. That inability, if I have it, of not being able to see how I'm showing up from other people's view.
It's so fascinating to me how we all interact with everybody socially in any aspect. But then in the workplace, it feels like we have these expectations that we don't always train people to deal with.
Hmm. Well, because the difference, of course, at work is we also have to perform. Okay, so it's not just about relationships, it's also about performance. This is why I think a good example would be with leaders now expected to be caring and compassionate and empathetic. And absolutely, yes. However, compassionate leadership isn't only about humanity, it's also about performance. So it's about having the courage to have the difficult conversations. It's about being authentic as precious coming down from you. Once we start to talk workplace, it's really different because of that accountability piece that we wouldn't have if it was about our family,
Yes,
if that makes sense.
that does make sense.
Mm,
Oh, want to dig a little bit more into that accountability piece.
yeah.
I think that really changes the dynamic.
Mm. I mean, I can give you an example if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I do quite a bit of coaching. And so I was working with manager, the senior manager the other day, she has a very diverse group and she's a very caring, empathetic manager. But a lot of the team, as most teams now, people have personal things, there's something going on. So with every single team member, there's either a diversity that she's wanting to be inclusive with or a personal situation that's going on. And she said, I am just exhausted from caring. I cannot care anymore. So here we are as someone who we would say, gosh, she's a manager I want to work for, but again, so what's gone wrong for her is she's just given permission, let people do it, been caring about it, and not put any boundaries or negotiation around that. And then once that's let go, it's really hard to pull back. So if you're accommodating and you're accommodating and you're accommodating, the only person who then fills the gap is her with more work filling in and then of course the team being cheesed off. Because we also have to, whenever I help you with something and I let you off some of your performance, it's going to be actually carried by others in the team because there's never any slack anymore. So I'm also in a position of everyone complaining to me, Marnie's not doing this and Marnie's not doing that. It's all very well to say care and empathy, but if the manager's not able to hold that performance expectation in an equitable way, then they're in trouble.
Absolutely. And you said a word that I really appreciate, which is boundaries. I had a conversation with a leader who had someone on their team going through something difficult. They gave them personal time off, not from any bank of anything, just it's the right thing to do. We need to give you time off. They didn't put any structure to that. And now they were finding that they wanted the person to come back or wanted to find out when the person was coming back, but they were afraid to ask them because they'd never talked about it. And so we had that conversation about, first of all, how do you deal with this one, but how do you prevent that in the future, which is you do those boundaries. And I had to remind her that having boundaries, especially in this kind of relationship, is compassionate because that employee was probably trying to figure out what to do and didn't know what to do. You're listening to Notes on Resilience. I'm Manya Chilinsky, speaker and advisor. My work examines how people and systems behave under pressure and what survival and disruption reveal about leadership, culture, and change. You can learn more about my work, including speaking and leadership support, at manyachilinsky.com/services. You can also subscribe to the newsletter at manyachilinsky.com/notes for monthly insights. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, you're right. It's a negotiation, So I say, Manuel, I'm quite happy for you to take, the week off because of whatever it is that's going on. How do you think we can best manage the workload that will create for the team, and how do we review? So it's right from the beginning, I'm talking about if I let you, this is the bigger picture here. What's your accountability for your colleagues to make sure that's front and center? Another example of the boundaries, which I'm seeing quite a bit again, and I've had a couple of people this week, is we're wanting to value diversity. And so I'm finding that managers who are managing, say, neurodiversity or a different culture or something that's different to what they've experienced maybe in the team. So they're wanting to be inclusive. They almost go too far.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and again, no boundaries. And so what happens is this is just this week. So the rest of the team now are getting really cheesed off because they actually see it's favorable treatment that this person's getting beyond what their diversity, disability, whatever it is, might require. Yeah, so really interesting. And again, the manager's good intentions. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And it's interesting because, I've had guests on the podcast where we talk about toxic workplaces and we talk about bullies in the workplace. And that's it. That's a different conversation because here we're mostly talking about people who mean well and are trying to do well and are still hitting some walls or putting themselves in a position where their staff thinks they're giving somebody favor when that wasn't the intention. The intention was to be accommodating and understanding.
Equity and consistency are critical parts of leadership, yeah. So we're straight away seeing that equity and consistency dissipate into favoritism. Yeah, it's really, really tricky. And I think, I mean, I do work occasionally with people who probably could be, described as bullying, but I think the majority of people want to do the right thing, the majority of managers. The other thing that I'm seeing that's really interesting as well. So the other day I had someone who is, I think, doing a fabulous job with their teams. Lots of change going on with this team. They've been very consultative. They've been very caring. They've been very helpful. They've kept those sort of goals, really, really up there. But they were sent for coaching because they needed to demonstrate more leadership, which I thought was fascinating. But they were seeing this person was too caring and not directive enough. So again, how do you keep your authenticity and good leadership, but manage that perception? So we just worked on how she might change the way in which she turned up at meetings and some of the language she might use and how she might report back, but certainly not shift any of the way in which she was consultative and co-creating and all of those things, So we've got this. Sometimes, people above us are saying, be more directive, be more firm, whatever, that's what leadership is. And, how do you manage that and still be authentic? So many pressures on managers. I mean, fewer and fewer people want to be a manager these days. No one wants to be a school principal or a.
Absolutely. And I see why. And it is work and it is an extra layer of thought for a lot of people to make sure that you are being inclusive and equitable and compassionate and still setting the boundaries and still having the productivity. And I can see I can see that it's frustrating. And I know that talking about it, so many people want that, but it is, they want to be that kind of leader, but it just takes work in addition to what they're already doing.
Yeah, and it's exhausting. I mean, just hearing you say all that back to me, I felt exhausted just listening. My goodness, this is what we're doing. So when we say, there's never enough resources to do what you want to do. So, the manager's got the job and then all this other stuff on top of it. And then quite often change coming on top. So absolutely, yeah, exhausting.
And the CEO and the CFO are saying, and we need you to be this productive, and now we need you to be more productive. Oh, and these people left, and so we need you to be more productive with fewer people. So it's a wonder anything gets done, frankly, sometimes.
Yeah. And I think the difference between the first line leadership and the more senior is you're the one who's going in and actually doing the work and plugging the holes, so you're the one who might be answering the phone, standing at the counter, whatever it might look like, because there's no one else to provide the service. Whereas if you're the CEO, you tend not to be having to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So as we're thinking about this concept of resilience, is there resilience and leadership sort of together? Is there a question that you think we still aren't asking?
Yeah, again with the workplace hat on, Mania. I think we focus too much on what we personally need to do. Okay, so there's been a huge amount in the last few years around investing in ourselves and our self-care and our networks, etc., etc. And I think we need to be focusing more on what collective looks like. What does collective, so I alluded earlier on that what we need to do collectively is different from what we need to do personally. And if you think, and I know you've had personal experience in community disaster. I mean, if you think about communities where there has been a disaster, and of course, like the States, we have, drought and flood and, all those sorts of things. If you actually look at what communities do to recover, we can learn a lot around the importance of the collective in recovery. And so I see in the workplaces, even now, I'm trying to talk about the importance of collective, not just within teams, but across teams. We still seem to navigate back somehow into individual accountability for their own resilience. And sometimes it's never enough because there's only so much you can do on your own. Yeah, so that would be, I think it's still not enough focus on that, I don't think.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Well, we are just getting up to the end of our time. And when you're thinking about the future and the work that you do, what gives you hope that we're going to be able to do this differently?
Well, I think that we are innately resilient, and I'm hoping that through hardship, the growth will emerge and continue, and for that to become normalized, growth to be normalized. I think that when things go wrong, that's our best learning, rather than it being a negative thing. And yeah, so I think that's my.
Nice. Kathryn, before we say goodbye, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do and how they can reach you?
Yeah, so I have a special interest, as you would have gathered, in resilience at work. And so, our business working with resilience has developed measures of resilience. So you can assess your individual team and leader resilience, and lots of resources that go with that. And we have global community of people who use our work. So you can pick up a resilience at work practitioner in lots of countries now, and get their wisdom and their support. So yeah, so that's
Well, and we'll put links to all of that in the show notes so to make it easier for people to find you. And Kathryn, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. And thanks to our listeners. We will catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to Notes on Resilience. I'm Manya Chilinsky, a speaker and advisor. My work focuses on how leaders support people through pressure and disruption. The show is edited by Neil Panji, and it's hosted on Buzzsprout. Subscribe to the podcast to stay connected and sign up for the newsletter at manyachilinsky.com/notes for monthly insights and updates.